I got a death threat, some crazy fan mail, and a hot dog and a Coke. I'll tell you about it all.
I'm Mike Quackenbush, and this is Till We Make It. If you are as passionate about pro wrestling as I am, you're in the right place. Go ahead, subscribe right now. I want to start by shouting out my 3 newest patrons. So thanks to Dylan, to Donnie, and to Logan, who just joined us over on Patreon and have now joined this awesome roll call of my patrons. And you can join too. A link to my Patreon is down below in the descriptus. Since the 90s, I've produced 500 or so live wrestling events. And if you and I have ever worked on one together, chances are you've seen me walking around with this, which I borrowed from my dad some time ago. And every few years he will ask if I ever know what happened to this thing. And of course, I'm always like, no, I have no idea where that went. And in here, I typically keep everything I need to run a show. I've got one folder for logistics type stuff, travel itineraries, if I need an insurance document for the venue, that sort of thing. And then I've also got a folder for creative. So the run sheet, the lineup would be in there, notes for commentators, that type of stuff. But in addition to all that, in the front, there's a little flap where I keep 3 souvenirs, 3 mementos that I have hung on to now. They've all got to be more than 20 years old. And I'm going to show them to you, and I want to tell you about each one. This little gem is definitely more than 20 years old. This was my pay one evening when working for a wrestling company called PWE. And I've probably wrestled for 3 or 4 different organizations whose initials were PWE, which would seem to indicate we need to get a little more creative about how we're naming our wrestling companies, gang. This was, more than 20 years ago on a fairgrounds somewhere in central Pennsylvania where a carnival was taking place. And so we were just kind of like the sideline entertainment as families were passing by on their way up the midway to play the next game or get on the next ride. And there was some wrestling. And my pay for this particular match was a tag team match. It was myself with 3 of my proteges at the time, was 1 sandwich, which is misspelled. I only just realized that now. And drink, which I think you could only choose soda. That was it. So very healthy meal for any hungry wrestler after they've had a match. 1 misspelled sandwich, which you know was either a hot dog or a hamburger, and a drink. This is literally the hot dog and a Coke. If you've ever heard those kind of stories before in wrestling, this is the actual physical proof. And here's why I keep this, not just to crack myself up, but it's a reminder of where I came from. It's a reminder to never forget your roots in wrestling. There was definitely a time when this was, to me, acceptable compensation, because what really mattered was getting the ring time, was getting to help develop my trainees, was getting out there and trying new ideas out in front of a live crowd. And ultimately, whether the compensation was 1 sandwich and drink, or it was cash, or some other kind of compensation, what really mattered was being in the ring. And this is a reminder of all those things to me. This second memento that I keep in my folder, this little folded up note, which has been decorated with some hearts and some balloons to make it very attractive, was handed to me after a match. I was in Mexico defending the Alianza Universal de Lucha Libre middleweight title more than 20 years ago at Arena Lopez Mateos in a section of Mexico City known as Tlalnepantla. And I was coming in as the defending champion, giving a rematch to the former champion, Skyda, who also happened to be my maestro. Something I discovered pretty quickly was that the Mexican fans in attendance on that particular day, and I would say Lopez Mateos was at most a third full for this auspicious occasion, they were not too fond of having their championship held by an American. And I remember before I had gone to the ring, that I was warned by a couple of the other luchadors, and there were a few Japanese wrestlers there from the Ultimo Dragon gym, who were saying to me, if a fan tries to hand you something, do not take it. And I thought this was a curious warning. Now, I'm not perfectly fluent in Spanish, not even close, but enough that we could converse. And everybody else there, they spoke enough English, or I knew enough Japanese, and I got the gist of what was being said. If someone's handing you something, don't take it. But when I was younger and a whole lot dumber, I thought, well, how dangerous could that be? What I didn't realize was, and thankfully this isn't the fate that befell me, a lot of times being handed something was basically like bait, and when you would reach out to take it, either someone would grab a hold of you, or in the case, if you were a rudo, a villain, they might take a swipe at you when this was happening. Now, I was going to the ring as a technico. I was going out as a baby face. And it was a technico versus technico match for this particular middleweight title. So I went about wrestling the match. It was 2 out of 3 falls. And an important piece of context. You may know that in lucha, anything that is a low blow, or what they would call a foul, is an instant disqualification. So what reads as a foul to the audience might be a little bit different than what we kind of think of as a low blow in wrestling. Case in point. I used to do a combination where I would deliver an inverted atomic drop, the Manhattan drop, and then go immediately into a fisherman's suplex. There was something about the way the Manhattan drop looked to the audience. They were convinced that this was a deliberate low blow on my part, and the audience was livid that the referee did nothing about it. And in my experiences in Mexico, the referees basically call it like it's a shoot. So if the referee had thought it was a foul, I would have lost the fall immediately. So the combination of the fact that the crowd on hand did not especially seem to like me as a champion or as a wrestler or as a person, and that they read this to be a move that only a heel would make during the match, even though I lost the title, on my way back to the locker room, there was a little girl like in a pink sundress hanging over the edge of like the bleachers right where I was about to go back into the locker room, and was holding this out. This little folded up note with hearts and balloons on it, and she had such a sweet little face about her. And I thought, well, what could be the harm? What could be the harm? She's trying to hand this to me. Isn't this great? What a wonderful fan interaction I'm having. This is the first death threat I ever received in wrestling. I will tell you the rest of this story in a second. If you're looking for wrestling advice, I publish 2 bits of advice every single Tuesday at 2:22 p.m. It goes out to my patrons. It's called Tidbit Tuesday. I also record a full-length Till We Make It video every single week that never appears here on the channel, and it's only seen by my patrons. I've also published more than 900 posts about every possible aspect of wrestling. The topics that you see scrolling across the screen right now are just a small sampling of the topics I have covered over on my Patreon. There is a lifetime's worth of wrestling knowledge and experience over there, and memberships are available for less than what lunch will cost you today. For less than a grande at Starbucks. I have a cappuccino habit, and I know this to be true. If you're really serious about accelerating your career, accomplishing your goals, and taking things up a level or 3, then invest in your future success. Jump on the link, which is down below, and it will take you to our Patreon. I'll see you over there. Was that an effective little cliffhanger? Let me tell you what this contains. I will paraphrase for you. It is written in Spanish, but I know enough to be able to tell you it is rife with obscenities and vulgarities. In this, the 2 brothers of the girl who handed me the note let me know that they're going to find me after today's show and kill me by stabbing me 1,000 times. It's very to the point. Backstage, when all the other wrestlers became aware of this particular note, they were quick to tell me, you have to take this seriously, it's not a joke, and we need to alert the promoter right away that this has been said. And they did take it very seriously. It's one thing now 20 plus years later to kind of reflect back on this because I'm alive and well, but this could have gone pear-shaped for me. Ultimately, what they ended up doing was they called a taxi cab to the back entrance to the arena. And they threw my bag in the taxi cab. I had a blanket over my head. They put me in the back and told the cabbie how to get me back to my hotel. And only once I was several blocks away did I take the blanket off so I could see where I was going. Obviously, this could have ended way, way worse than here we are a couple decades later telling it like it's a funny anecdote on a YouTube channel. But this reminds me of a couple things. Every time I see this note, number one, it's a great reminder to keep my wits about me no matter what. But number two, it also reminds me that I need to be as cosmopolitan as possible. And here's what I mean by this. The culture around lucha libre in Mexico is not the same as the culture around pro wrestling in the United States or the culture around pro res in Japan, etc. The norms in the US are not what the norms are in Spain, and that's not what the norms might be in Taiwan. I need to keep all of these things top of mind, and I need to be a cosmopolitan wrestler, not some local yokel who doesn't understand how it works. The last of these... Let's try again. The last of these peculiar mementos that I've kept in my folder for decades and decades is a letter that I received. And based on what it contains, the idea that it proposes, it's strange that it leads with this information. The person who wrote this to me wanted me to know that Elijah Burke is washed up. I've never worked with Elijah Burke. I'm not sure I could pick Elijah Burke out of a police lineup. Basically, this goes on to detail the perfect gimmick in professional wrestling that's going to make everybody involved tons of money and it will become the most famous thing in all of pro wrestling. The author of this wanted me to know that they've been studying some obscure martial arts for quite some time and that they believe they can invent 1,000 holds never seen before in professional wrestling. And based on the date on this, this was from before I even took the moniker of the Master of 1,000 Holds. This was really anticipating me here. Maybe this is where I got the idea. It's not. Dean Malenko had been the man of 1,000 holds and was retired by the time I became the master of 1,000 holds, and I actually got that title from Johnny Saint after a match we had in Germany. Nevertheless, it goes on to detail this perfect gimmick, which is here tentatively called The Prophecy, which is very original. And here's my very favorite part. After this and the predictable internet groundswell that will make this thing legendary, I can guarantee that the Prophecy wardrobe will hang in the Smithsonian Institute in Washington, D.C. There's so much more to this one, but those are the really important parts. Why I unfold this letter every once and again and read it back to myself is as a reminder. Everybody thinks they've got great ideas about professional wrestling. And the truth is, it's all very, very subjective. What makes great wrestling to me might not be what makes great wrestling to you. But at the end of the day, I really do believe this. Ideas are cheap. Ideas are a dime a dozen. It's not about the great idea that you've got. It's about whether or not you can execute. It's not ideation. It's execution. So, can you execute? That's what I think every time I see that letter. There's lots of other stuff that I've kept throughout the years, but I have never ever talked about why those three things are in my folder, I think, to anyone before I've just told it to you now. I'd love to know, have you kept any weird mementos from your wrestling career? And if so, will you tell me about them down below in the comments? If you enjoyed today's video, leave me a like-a-palooza. If you'd like to keep on learning, there's a video appearing on screen right now about some realities of becoming a veteran wrestler. Click on that, and I'll see you over there.